Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here to show you how to make a potato powder, or at least how I'm doing it. I only just started doing this and I'm still experimenting with the powder itself, but I want to at least show you how I do it. I'll talk a little bit about what I've done with it and how to use it, but I'll also be doing some more experiments through the year, and I'll keep you updated on those in most likely in this and that videos down the road. So let's get to this. So what I do, I'm going to be making another batch today because my goal is to fill up this quart jar. It would be more full, but I've been experimenting with it obviously. So it would be about up to here, but I've made a few different batches and trying different things with it. And just what I've done there, I want to give you some ideas of the best way that you can use this for mashed potatoes and for thickening soups and stews. Anytime you're dehydrating potatoes, it's really best to at least blanch them. It's one of the only things I would cook at least a little bit first before I dehydrated. And actually, until making this powder, I've never dehydrated potatoes because I haven't been interested, at least not yet. So this was just a thought that I had. I thought would be kind of fun to work with and might make life easier through the year for various different recipes that I like to make. So to get started, what you need to do is you want to prepare your potatoes just like you would if you're going to make mashed potatoes. So I prefer to peel my potatoes when I'm having mashed potatoes. Some people don't, but we like our potatoes peeled when it comes to that. So I peel them, I cut them. I typically will cook them in this pot, so I'll fill the pot as full as I can with potatoes. As long as I can keep it covered with the water, it's good. And so that's what I'll be doing again today. And bring it to a boil and then let it cook until they're very, very soft. You want them as soft as possible in this case. You don't want them undercooked because of how you're going to use them, because you want a really great consistency on this, just like you would want for mashed potatoes in the first place. Then once you drain them, you're going to blend them up however your favorite way is. This is one case I do use just a hand mixer, the electric kind, though I have used my non-electric egg beater to make all kinds of stuff, even a small batch of mashed potatoes. But because whenever I'm doing a big batch, do like to rely on that electric mixer. And then I did add just a little bit of milk to it to try to get it nice and smooth. You want enough liquid in there that it's going to be easy to mash and to spread out onto your sheets. So in this case, what I'm using my Kasori to dehydrate these right now. But if I was using my Nesco, I have silicone trays for that as well. They're the donut shaped ones. But I'm using my Kasori, and the silicone edged, you don't really even need edges on this. So this would be one if you don't have the silicone trays and you can't afford to buy them. You can easily use parchment paper in this case, because you don't have to worry about your mashed potatoes running off the sides like you would with dehydrating milk or eggs. That's where you need those edges to hold everything in place. But in this case, parchment paper would work just fine because it's thick enough that you just want to spread it on there. You don't want it too thick. In fact, I initially thought maybe the thinner the better, but I found it really doesn't make a difference. You just want you want a nice layer on there so it will dehydrate well. And I found it dehydrates up pretty quickly, even with a thicker layer. So initially I kind of always shoot for 18 hours, 12 to 18 hours. It seems like this is about 10 to 12 hours it takes for a thicker layer of potatoes to get fully dehydrated. And the funny thing is you'll find, at least on the silicone sheets, I don't know if you'll see the same thing with the parchment paper or the plastic sheets that come with a lot of dehydrators, but the mashed potatoes will, as they're drying, they'll kind of warp and they'll make a funny shape. But that's fine. As long as in fact, that's actually good because that allows more airflow underneath the potatoes, because that's, especially when you're putting it against plastic, silicone, or parchment paper, it's that under part that's going to take longer to dehydrate. So it'll develop holes, and that's great. And so then once it's fully dry and you can just crack it, then just crunch it up the best way you can. You can use your hands. A lot of times now, since I'm using silicone, I can just crunch everything up within the silicone. But then I found that a lot of times the potato pieces wanted to kind of go flying here, there, and everywhere. You can also take that and put it in a larger bowl. I often do this, and I'll use some kind of masher or my hands. You'll find that with the potato, it is a little harder to crush than, like, say, tomato flakes. When I'm making tomato flakes, I can just crush those up with my hands easily enough. But with the potatoes, it's a little bit harder to do. So you might want to do something like get something that you can mash it with. Like, this is my fruit masher. I also have this tamper right here that Patrick made. He made both of these for me. And this is great for mashing stuff down into jars. So I'll use that when I'm doing the tomato flakes, and I'll press it down into the jar. But you can do that in a bowl as well. And then what you'll want to do is you'll want to get the pieces small enough, at least, that you can put in your blender. And so I put the pieces in the blender, and here's the key. When I did the first batch in the blender and then tried it out, I just blended it. I didn't try to get it very fine, because I figured, like the tomato flakes, it would dissolve well enough in hot water. However, what I found is the finer you can get that ground up, the finer the powder, the better the results will be, especially if you're trying to use it to make a mashed potato. So that's going to be the first step in getting a nice, smooth, non-gritty mashed potato out of your potato powder. So I ended up putting all this here back into the blender and then blending it for a lot longer so it could be very powdery. It still has a grainy feel to it, but when I experimented with this, I found I got a much better texture than the ones where I had it a lot more coarse. So then obviously you can store it in your jar. You can then, once you get your jar full, you can vacuum seal it like I always do. I have a billion videos out there showing how to vacuum seal in many ways. In fact, the tomato video that might come out before this one, I show using the chamber to vacuum seal. And so I'll link to a few different videos down below, either way, that show how to use a vacuum chamber, how to use the off-brand vacuum sealer with the little bicycle looking pump, as well as one on how to use a brake bleeder to vacuum seal your jars. And you can also use a food saver if you have one. I don't have one anymore because I'm fed up with food saver machines. So once you got that real fine, then you can start working with it. And what I recommend, especially with the holidays coming up, this was part of the reason I wanted to do this with a lot of my potatoes I have coming in from the garden. I still have a lot more to go dig up. Is that I thought it would be great to have something that I can much more easily make into a mashed potato on busy days, including on Thanksgiving. And though I'm not sold yet whether or not I'm going to do that for Thanksgiving, I already know for certain the ways I'm going to use this in a mashed potato. And this was the reason I decided to do this. And plus it takes up a lot less room in storage. You would be surprised how much potato powder is in here. Like I said, I had this pot full of potatoes. Again, I would say the jar was probably about that full initially. So almost a little better than a pint of potato powder out of this big pot. This is 6 quarts. So out of the 6 quarts of potato, then I ended up with a little better than a pint of powder from that. So as far as storage goes, it's going to take up a lot less room and no chance of the potatoes going bad or wrinkling up or starting to grow while they're in storage. So what I did was I experimented with different ways to mix this up. And I still recommend you keep experimenting, but when you go to mix the potato powder with your liquid, be it milk or water or both, sometimes I'll do a half and half blend, start with 4 parts water to every 1 part potato powder. And I recommend starting very small to begin with. So for example, take a teaspoon of potato powder, add 4 teaspoons of water to that. So you have 4 parts water, 1 part potato powder, and mix it well and then heat it. You'll find that just sitting there, the potato powder will start to rehydrate just fine. It'll reconstitute, but it will stay gritty until you cook it. So cooking it a little bit in your liquid, whatever it is the second most important thing to getting a nice smooth mashed potato. So again, I recommend experimenting and start with the 4 parts water. It's very likely you're going to want to increase that to 5 or 6 parts water, but I do recommend starting with at least 4 parts, no less than that, but no more. Now, the other reason why you don't want to start with too much water at a time, because it could possibly take up to 8 parts water to 1 part of the powder, depending on the consistency you're looking for. But that is because, especially once you start heating it, if you start adding that potato powder in because you decide it's too runny and you want to thicken it up, then it's not going to blend well. In fact, at that point, you're probably going to end up having to use your stick blender to mix it in well because it's already hot. It's just like anything. When you add a starch to a hot liquid, it tends to want to clump and it's not going to end up smooth. It's better that you add the water as you go and just keep working with it. And keep in mind, as it's cooking, it's going to take a few minutes. It does take longer than, let's say, tomato powder or tomato paste or anything else for it to fully take on that water. That's what I found out. It'll just keep getting thicker and thicker, and it takes time. It's not as immediate as certain other things. So give it a few minutes, and if it doesn't, and then of course as it cools down a little bit, it's going to thicken up even more. And I don't think I took a picture actually of the very last batch I made. That was the smoothest one because it was the one I did with the very finely blended up potatoes. So I had a nice powder, and that one turned out the best. Now here's the thing about the flavor. The flavor is definitely far better than any of those instant potatoes you can buy in the store, but they're not exactly instant like the instant potatoes. And the instant potatoes in the store, even the more healthier ones I saw, have a lot of added ingredients that are unnecessary and not necessarily healthy. Like, we got a lot of these ingredients that are called generally recognized as safe, which means it's only generally recognized as safe, which means it could be totally unsafe for some people in particular. And using a lot of it can be very unsafe. So you're better just to avoid all that. There's nothing in here but a little bit of milk and potatoes. That's it. That's all that is in this jar. No added preservatives or anything. And I have no concern about this, especially once it's vacuum sealed, keeping for years to come. So at that point, then what I recommend though is, before you really get serious, and I did mention this already, but I want to say it again, before you get serious, like you just want to jump in and make a real fancy dinner for company or whatever, or your Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever holidays you celebrate dinner, I recommend continue to experiment. Try little batches at a time and keep working with it. And then you'll get a better idea of how you can get a nice smooth consistency according to what you're going to use it in. So I don't know if I will use it this year for our Thanksgiving dinner. I might, if I get it all figured out, if I feel pretty comfortable with it by then. But I know for certain I'm still going to really like having this on hand, because this would be great to use, especially in cold cannon. Because cold cannon, you're throwing a bunch of stuff in there anyway. You got your onions, your garlic, your cabbage. I like to throw meat, usually some ground meat or some chopped up leftover roast is a couple of my favorite things to use in cold cannon. And I'll link to, I think it's an old recipe I originally got from Cat's Cradle back when she was still doing videos. I don't think I have a new video out, but maybe I'll put a new one out on it eventually. And maybe when I do that, I'll do it using my potato powder. That will be one of my updates. But I'll link to the old one down below. It's one of our favorite comfort food type meals. And it is a great one dish meal because you got your potato, you got your cabbage, and if you're vegan, you can leave it that way, and if you're not, you can add some meat, but you don't have to. Traditionally, cold cannon didn't always have meat because the Irish couldn't always, when that was a popular dish, it was based obviously on the potatoes and the cabbage, and meat was a little too expensive, and we're seeing that happen again. So you don't have to use the meat. You can make a great one dish meal with the potatoes and whatever other herbs and spices you want to add. So that's something I definitely use it in. And I could see myself using this as a topping for shepherd's pie. So that's why I wanted this on hand, because if it's like, oh, I really feel like having cold cannon, but I don't feel like peeling a bunch of potatoes and cooking them up and then mashing them and then making my cold cannon, I'd rather just have some potato powder on hand that I can just add water and cook that up and then make my cold cannon. That would take a big step out of it, especially on those busy days. So that's what I'm looking at for certain. Those are the meals I'm going to be trying first. At least the cold cannon, if not the shepherd's pie. And then anything else that one would would typically use mashed potatoes in. But also, as I mentioned earlier in the video, this would also be a great option for thickening up soups and stews. I would assume that maybe freeze drying your potatoes might make it easier for getting it powdered up well, but for those of us who are either not interested in a freeze dryer or just can't afford it, I wanted to do this using only a dehydrator, and I am so far very happy with it. So anyway, I hope that gives you some ideas, and please share with us if you've already been doing this, what your experiences are down below. How did you get a real good consistency making a mashed potato out of it, and what you've tried it in, what you've used it for, and so on. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something new. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.